The Creel had once been a proud people, standing among the stars as a beacon of wisdom and strength. Our empire stretched across galaxies, our cities towering over ancient lands, our minds sharp with knowledge passed down through countless generations. We were an ancient species, and we had known peace for so long that we believed it was unshakable. But then the Thanar came. We had heard of them in stories, an ancient race known for their brutality, their war-driven society, and their terrifying ability to tear through civilizations with terrifying ease. But those stories were always distant, rumors from across the void of space. They were never supposed to reach us. Not the Creel. We were too powerful, too wise to fall prey to such an onslaught. But when the Thanar arrived, their invasion came without warning. They tore through our defensive grids like paper, bypassing our most advanced technologies with ease. The first world they struck was Creel Prime, the jewel of our empire, and it fell within hours. Their ships appeared like black shadows in the sky, swarming over our cities with relentless force. We fought back, of course. We had no other choice. But their weapons, far beyond anything we had ever encountered, cut through our defenses as if they were nothing. It didn't take long before our capital city was reduced to ash, the once proud monuments of our culture left smoldering under a red sky. We fought with everything we had, but it was clear from the beginning that we were no match for the Thanar. Our armies, once the most formidable in the galaxy, were no more than prey to them. They had no mercy, no hesitation, and no honor. Their goal was not simply conquest, it was to break us, to destroy the very spirit of the Creel. As our fleets burned in space and our cities fell to the ground, we realized the truth. We were outmatched. Our people were dying. Our world was dying. In that moment, desperation took hold. We had always been a proud people, self-reliant, never asking for help. We had always believed that we could overcome any challenge. But now, that pride became our burden. With every passing day, our hope dwindled, and soon we found ourselves fighting not for victory, but for survival. But survival alone wasn't enough. We had to do something. Something drastic, something we had never done before. We cried for help. It wasn't an easy decision. The thought of begging for assistance from others, from species who had long looked down on us, was almost unthinkable. But we were running out of time and we were running out of options. The Thanar had crushed everything in their path, and they showed no sign of slowing down. If we didn't act, the Creel would be lost, forgotten by the galaxy. Our people, our history, our way of life, everything we had built over millennia would be gone in the blink of an eye. So with all the dignity we could muster, we sent out a call. We broadcasted a message across every channel, every frequency, to every civilization in reach. We begged for aid, for help, for someone to stand with us against the Thanar. We didn't care who answered. We just needed someone. Anyone. The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, I feared that our cry for help had been lost in the vastness of the galaxy, swallowed by the void. The silence that followed our desperate cry for help felt like a physical weight pressing down on us, suffocating every shred of hope we had left. At first, we thought it was just a delay, a misunderstanding perhaps. Surely there was some glitch in the transmission, some interference blocking the message, but as days turned into weeks, that hope began to erode. We watched as the Thanar's fleet continued its unrelenting advance, each day bringing new devastation. The sky over Creel Prime, once a beautiful blue expanse, was now filled with smoke and fire, a grim reminder of what we had lost. Our once proud cities had crumbled, and the survivors were scattered, hiding in underground bunkers or fleeing to distant moons, searching for shelter in the face of annihilation. I could see the despair in the eyes of my people. Those who had once stood tall, who had built a thriving empire across the stars, now reduced to broken refugees. The world we had known was disappearing piece by piece as the Thanar swept across our lands with brutal efficiency. They didn't just conquer, they destroyed with purpose, erasing every trace of our civilization. There were no prisoners, no negotiations, only an unstoppable march toward total annihilation. Every battle we fought, we lost. Every plan we made was futile. The Thanar's technology was far beyond anything we had ever imagined. Their ships moved with terrifying precision, their weapons tearing apart entire fleets as if they were made of paper. We had no chance. I stood among the ruins of our capital, staring at the charred remains of what had once been the heart of the Creel Empire. The once proud towers were now nothing more than twisted metal and ash, the streets deserted, the silence oppressive. I wondered how long it would take before the Thanar reached the last remnants of our people. And then what? Would we be erased from history? Would we become nothing more than a footnote in the grand tapestry of the universe? And then there was the silence. For days, nothing came. No response. Not from the Takor, nor from the Hegemon, nor from any of the great galactic powers we had once considered allies. They had all seen our plea, I was sure of it. How could they not? We had broadcasted it across every channel, every frequency, and yet there was no answer. No fleet appeared in our skies, no messages of solidarity came through our communications arrays. The galaxy was watching, and it chose to look away. It wasn't just that no one came to help. It was the cold realization that no one cared. It wasn't that we had been abandoned. It was that we were forgotten. In the grand scheme of things, we were nothing. Just another dying species, another failed empire. The powerful empires of the galaxy were too focused on their own interests to bother with us. We were no longer useful, no longer an ally worth protecting. Our leaders held meetings, sent more messages, tried to rally what was left of our fleet, but the Thanar were too powerful, too relentless. There was no sign of anyone coming to our aid. The very idea of it seemed laughable. It was a cruel reminder of how insignificant we had become. Alone, abandoned, and on the verge of extinction, we were left to fight a war we could not win. And I, standing in the midst of this ruin, could only wonder how it had come to this. But it was in this darkness that I felt something stir, something that had been lost in the weight of our desperation. It wasn't hope exactly, but something close. We were not finished, not yet. There had to be someone out there, someone who could hear us. The universe was vast, and surely there was someone who would stand with us. But time was running out, and we could not wait forever. Just as we had all but given up, when the silence seemed like it would be our final companion in this cold, dark universe, a signal pierced through the void. It was faint at first, an anomaly, a flicker among the static of endless empty space. We thought it was just another mistake, a malfunction in our transmission systems, or perhaps a last-ditch effort by a desperate soul who had found a fleeting connection. But when we looked closer, when we tuned our frequency with trembling hands, we realized it was something different. It was a message, a response to our cry. The words were simple, unembellished, and yet they carried a weight that almost broke me. It was a voice not from the grand empires of the galaxy, not from the civilizations we had once called allies, but from Earth, our distant, primitive cousins from a backwater world on the edge of known space. We'll stand with you. We'll fight for you. The transmission wasn't much. No grand promises or speeches. Just those words. At first, it almost seemed absurd. The humans, so small, so young in comparison to the ancient empires of the galaxy, were offering to help us? They had no great fleets, no centuries-old weapons, no advanced technologies like the Takor or the Hegemon. Earth was just a speck in the galaxy, barely noticed by the other powers. And yet, here they were, reaching across the stars, willing to stand with the Creel. I couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense. Why would the humans, with their limited resources and their struggling space program, come to the aid of a dying empire? Why would they risk everything when so many others had turned their backs on us? And yet, the message was clear. They were not just offering help in words. They were offering something much more powerful, their willingness to fight. They had no illusions about the odds. They knew they couldn't win this battle easily, but they were offering us their strength, their courage, and most importantly, their determination to stand against the Thanar. The initial response from our leaders was one of disbelief. We had been abandoned by everyone else, and now we were supposed to trust in these humans, these creatures who had barely escaped their own solar system a few centuries ago. It was a difficult pill to swallow, but as the days passed and the Thanar continued their advance, there was no other choice. We needed their help. We had no pride left to defend, no dignity to protect. Our people were dying, our cities falling, and our world crumbling beneath the weight of an unstoppable force. What else could we do but accept the offer? A few days later, their ships arrived. They were nothing like the vast armadas of the other galactic powers, nothing like the sleek, powerful warships of the Takor or the Hegemon. The humans came in what appeared to be a ragtag fleet, small, unpolished ships that seemed barely capable of space travel, let alone interstellar war. They were pieced together, with parts scavenged from other vessels, an eclectic assortment of designs and technology, patched together through human ingenuity. Yet as I watched them emerge from the stars, I realized that it wasn't their technology that mattered. It was the fact that they had come at all. The fleet was led by a human captain, a man who, when we finally made contact, spoke with a kind of raw certainty that shook me to my core. His name was Captain Rourke, and his voice carried no arrogance, no pretension, just a deep, resolute confidence that somehow made all the difference. "We're not much," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, "but we're not going to leave you to die. We're here to fight, and we'll fight until it's done." It was the first time in weeks that I felt something like hope stir within me. The humans, with all their flaws, their inexperience, their small fleets and broken ships, were here. And they weren't leaving. They had no reason to stand with us, no political alliances, no deep personal stakes. They simply chose to because it was the right thing to do. That choice, that simple yet profound decision, would change everything. The first human fleet arrived 2 weeks after their message, a motley collection of ships that seemed out of place amidst the advanced warships of the Thanar. It was hard to believe that these ships, battered and patched together, could make a difference against the looming threat that had already destroyed so much. Yet, there they were, drifting through the void, their hulls scarred from previous battles, but undeterred. There was no grandeur to their arrival. The ships were small, each one built with a distinct patchwork of designs, as though cobbled together from whatever materials the humans could scrounge. The human fleet lacked the smooth, polished lines of the Takor vessels, or the intimidating bulk of the Hegemon's warships. Instead, they were made up of various types of ships, transport vessels, mining craft, outdated warships, and even civilian ships converted into battle-ready forms. To many, they would have looked like nothing more than scrap. But to us, they were something more. They were hope, the kind we had all but abandoned. The first of their ships to make contact with us was a medium-sized vessel that appeared to be an old transport ship retrofitted for combat. The hull was scarred and scraped from years of service, but it bore the marks of an indomitable spirit. The captain of this ship, a man named Rorg, appeared on our screens with a calm, almost quiet confidence. He didn't speak grand words, and there was no dramatic introduction. There was no need for that. His simple words, delivered with the kind of certainty that only comes from understanding the gravity of a situation, were enough to carry a weight we hadn't felt in a long time. We're here to fight, and we'll fight beside you, no matter what. At that moment, I understood something that I hadn't been able to grasp before. The humans weren't here because they thought they could win with ease. They didn't believe they could single-handedly turn the tide of the war with their ships alone. They were here because to them, it wasn't about victory. It was about doing what was right. They had no delusions about the odds. They knew they were underpowered compared to the Thanar, but they were still standing. They offered no promises of quick victory or easy triumph. What they did offer was a willingness to fight until the very end. It was this raw, unfiltered courage that set them apart. It wasn't just their technology, which, though functional, was nowhere near the sophistication of the Thanar's weapons. It wasn't their advanced tactics, which were still in their infancy compared to the battle-hardened Thanar. It was their heart, their resolve, and their refusal to surrender. And it was that spirit that breathed life into the Creole once more. Introduction. The humans quickly set to work, despite their apparent lack of resources. They didn't hesitate. They immediately began coordinating with our forces, organizing our scattered fleets, and strategizing with the few commanders we had left. They didn't expect us to bend their will or impose their tactics on us. Instead, they listened to us, asked questions, and integrated our knowledge with their own in ways we had never anticipated. In return, we shared what we knew about the Thanar strategies, their strengths, and their weaknesses. The first few skirmishes were nothing short of chaotic. Our forces, disorganized and battered, joined the humans in the fray with trepidation. But the humans fought alongside us with a fury that defied their small numbers and their lack of advanced weaponry. They had no fear, only a single-minded determination to hold their ground. In one of the first engagements, a human fighter, small and unassuming compared to the Thanar's massive dreadnoughts, managed to outmaneuver a Thanar warship using tactics that no one had thought of before. Simple, direct strikes that took advantage of the Thanar's overconfidence. The Thanar ship, expecting a standard attack, was blindsided by the human pilot's ingenuity. It wasn't a victory by conventional means, but it was enough to buy us a crucial moment of respite. That was the first time I realized that it wasn't just their technology that set the humans apart. It was their ingenuity, their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, and to use what they had in ways no one else had considered. They didn't have superior firepower or centuries of knowledge. What they had was something far more valuable: the will to win, the will to fight, and the will to stand together. And with each passing day, as more human ships joined the fray, we learned that their unrelenting drive to do what was right had become the cornerstone of our own survival. The Thanar had underestimated them. They had assumed that the humans were insignificant, that their ragtag fleet would be crushed without a second thought. But now, as the battle raged on, they realized they had made a terrible mistake. The humans were a force to be reckoned with, and they fought not for glory or conquest, but for the simple reason that they believed in standing against tyranny. and that belief was something we could no longer ignore. The war had been raging for months, the Thanar tightening their grip around the remains of Creel Prime. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the arrival of the humans had changed the way we fought. Where we had once been fractured, isolated by the sheer scale of our losses, now we stood as a unified force. The humans, with their sheer will and resourcefulness, had brought new life to our ranks. Their ships, though small and far from the most advanced, had become the heart of our resistance, guiding us in tactics that relied not on brute force, but on strategy, ingenuity, and sheer determination. We quickly learned that the Thanar, with all their technological might, had never been forced to adapt. They were masters of destruction, but their arrogance had led them to underestimate their foes. The humans knew that to defeat the Thanar, we had to play to our strengths, our ability to adapt, to improvise, to learn quickly from every mistake. And though we had lost much, we were not without resources. Our old military archives, once the pride of the Creel Empire, were brought back online. Hidden in the vaults were forgotten strategies, tactics we had once used to defeat our rivals, now reawakened by the human commanders. Captain Rourke, a man who had once been a military strategist on Earth, was the one who spearheaded the transformation. He would often sit for hours with Creel tacticians, poring over maps, adjusting plans, and teaching us methods of asymmetrical warfare. It was then that we realized how far we had fallen from our roots. The Creel had been conquerors, and over time we had become dependent on the superiority of our ships, our technology. We had forgotten how to fight with grit, with heart. The humans reminded us that sometimes the simplest tactics could be the deadliest. They showed us how to strike quickly, to hit where the enemy was weakest, and to never give them a moment to regroup. It was during one of these meetings that the first glimmer of hope began to take form. The Thanar fleet had advanced to the last stronghold on Creel Prime, the only city still holding out against them. The battle had been long and brutal, but the Thanar had underestimated the power of our united front. The humans had quickly integrated themselves into our defense, not as allies who sat on the sidelines, but as warriors who fought side by side with us. They had no idea what it was like to see an entire civilization crumble, to watch as everything you knew and loved was burned to the ground. But they understood what it meant to fight for survival. And that was enough. In the dead of night, as the Thanar regrouped for a final assault, the humans launched an audacious counterattack. Their ships, using Creel knowledge and human ingenuity, moved like shadows through the wreckage of the city. They struck from unexpected angles, overwhelming the Thanar's defenses with lightning speed. It wasn't a full-scale attack, but it was enough to give the Thanar pause. We had learned something that day. The Thanar might have the power to obliterate cities, to burn entire worlds, but they didn't have the flexibility to adapt as quickly as we could. For the first time in months, the Thanar were the ones on the defensive. Our joint forces launched attack after attack, striking from hidden positions, using decoys, and confusing the Thanar with tactics that played on their overconfidence. We had always believed that a greater strength might be unexpected, but the flesh and blood are memories, and the flesh and blood. That was part of the fascination of prey. The flesh and blood are the ones on the defensive. But the humans had taught us that there was more to war than strength. Sometimes, the greatest weapon was the willingness to stand firm in the face of impossible odds, and to trust that, together, we could find a way to turn the tide. But despite our successes, the war was far from over. The Thanar were ruthless, and even in their momentary retreat, they showed no sign of mercy. Our victory was fleeting, and the stakes had never been higher. We were fighting for the very existence of the Creel, and we knew that if we failed, there would be no second chance. The human fleet, while brave, was still outmatched in sheer numbers. And yet in every battle, in every skirmish, their strength grew. Captain Rourke had been right all along. The power of the humans lay not in their ships or their technology, but in their spirit, their ability to defy the impossible. It was their courage, their unyielding will to fight, that had made them more than just an ally. They had become the soul of our resistance. And with them, we had a chance to win, not by the strength of our fleets, but by the strength of our will. We fought not just to survive, but to restore the future of our people. With the humans by our side, we would not give up. We could not. The war had turned into a brutal, long-drawn struggle. Despite the growing strength of our alliance with the humans, the Thanar were relentless. Their ships, vast and cold, never stopped advancing, and their tactics grew more desperate with every passing day. They were determined to crush us, not just for conquest, but for the very satisfaction of watching an entire species fall to its knees. And yet, despite everything, despite the overwhelming odds, we persisted. The humans had proven something that no one, not even our most brilliant tacticians, had thought possible. They had turned the tide, not with might, but with a fierce will to never back down. It was during a particularly devastating counteroffensive by the Thanar that we saw the first real sign of their desperation. For weeks they had been systematically cutting off every retreat, every safe haven we had left. They were coming for the last stronghold, the final remnants of our world that had not yet been turned to ash. We knew that if they succeeded here, if they took this city, we would be wiped out entirely. The very existence of the Creel would cease to matter in the galaxy. The humans, however, had a plan. They had no illusions about the scale of the conflict. They knew that even with the help they had offered, the odds of survival were slim. But they didn't care. To them, it was never about whether they could win. It was about standing tall in the face of the impossible. It was about showing the Thanar that the Creel, though battered and broken, still had the heart to fight, that we still had the resolve to stand against tyranny, and it was that spirit that would prove to be our greatest weapon. For the first time in months, there was a sense of unity among the Creel people. The humans had ignited something within us, a kind of fire we had long since lost. We were no longer fighting just to survive. We were fighting for the future, for the legacy of our ancestors, for everything that had made the Creel who we were. The humans had shown us that survival was not enough. We had to fight for something greater. The final battle for the last city began as the Thanar forces, now numbering in the hundreds of ships, began their descent. They expected us to break, to surrender in the face of their overwhelming might. But we didn't. Instead, we had set a trap. For weeks, the humans had been working with us, drawing out the Thanar forces, baiting them with false signals, feigned retreats, and decoys. They knew that the Thanar's pride would be their undoing. The Thanar were used to overwhelming force, to crushing their enemies with sheer power. They were not prepared for the kind of tactics the humans in Creel had been developing in the shadows. It was a gamble that risked that, if it failed, would wipe us out completely, but it was our only chance. As the Thanar fleet moved into position for their final assault, they found themselves trapped in a web of decoys and hidden ambush points. The humans had integrated Creel technology with their own in a way we had never imagined possible. Our weapons, once thought obsolete, became tools of destruction in their hands. Together, we launched a counterattack, striking from the darkness, hitting the Thanar where it hurt. They fought back, of course, but now they were the ones on the defensive. They had been forced into a battle of attrition, a battle they hadn't prepared for. Captain Rourke's voice rang out through the communication lines as we launched wave after wave of attacks. "This is our moment. We stand together no matter what comes. We fight for our future." His words resonated through the comms, not just to the human ships, but to the entire Creel fleet. It was a rallying cry, one that stirred something deep inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. In the chaos that followed, something incredible happened. The Thanar, for the first time in this war, were not sure of themselves. They had faced countless civilizations, all of them crushed without mercy, but they had never encountered anything like this. They had never been forced to adapt, to fight against a force that was not only outmatching them at every turn. The battle lasted for hours, but by the end of it, the Thanar had suffered heavy losses. Their once proud fleet, though still formidable, had been severely crippled, and their forces began to retreat. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. The Thanar were still a dangerous enemy, and we had lost many good warriors, both Creel and human. But it was enough to send a message. We weren't finished yet. As the Thanar pulled back, licking their wounds, they knew that this was no longer an easy conquest. They had underestimated the Creel, and they had underestimated the humans. In that moment, we had proven to the galaxy, to ourselves, and to the Thanar that we would not go quietly into the night. We would fight until the very last breath. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that we had a chance. The aftermath of that decisive battle left the galaxy in a fragile equilibrium. The Thanar had been pushed back for the moment, their retreat a sign of their realization that the war had changed course. For the Creel and the humans, it was a hard-earned victory, a brief but significant triumph in a war that had seemed unwinnable. Yet it was only the beginning. We knew that the Thanar, though defeated in one engagement, were not the type to give up easily. They were calculating, vicious, and had the resources to strike again when they least expected it. But what that battle had shown us, what it had proven to the galaxy, was something far more important than the Thanar's retreat. It had shown us the strength of our alliance with the humans, a force that was no longer just an inconvenience for the Thanar. The humans had given us something we hadn't had in a long time, a reason to hope. They had stood with us not because it was convenient, but because it was the right thing to do. In the darkest days of our conflict, when no one else had offered help, when we had all but resigned ourselves to extinction, they came. And they fought beside us, even when the odds were stacked against them, even when it seemed as though there was no chance of winning. In the days following the battle, the atmosphere on Creel Prime was one of cautious optimism. We were battered, our cities still burning in places, our people grieving for the countless lives lost. But there was a sense of purpose in the air, a renewed spirit. The humans, though weary from the fight, were relentless in their support. They worked side by side with the Creel, helping to rebuild what was left of the shattered cities, offering their knowledge and sharing in our grief. It wasn't just the firepower they had brought that made a difference, it was their unshakable will to fight and their commitment to stand with us, no matter the cost. That spirit became infectious, spreading through our ranks like a wildfire, lighting the way for a future we had long since abandoned. The Creel military began to reorganize under the guidance of human officers who had integrated themselves fully into our command structure. It was a difficult process, the merging of two vastly different cultures and ways of warfare, but it worked. We had learned from the humans, and they had learned from us. We shared knowledge, tactics, and, most importantly, a common goal. The Thanar would not win. Months passed, and we prepared for the inevitable counterattack. The Thanar would not sit idly by and allow such a setback. They would come back with a vengeance. And when they did, We needed to be ready. The human fleet, bolstered by reinforcements from Earth, grew in strength. Their ships, though still outmatched in size and firepower by the Thanar, had become more sophisticated, more effective in battle. It wasn't their ships that made the difference, it was their resilience, their refusal to bow to the overwhelming might of the enemy. Further, some say the desire for victory. We trained together, human and Creel, side by side. We studied the weaknesses we had exploited in the last battle and prepared for new strategies. The humans had shown us how to fight with what we had, how to use our ingenuity to outsmart an enemy that relied too heavily on brute strength. As we fought alongside them, we understood their philosophy. It wasn't about raw power. It was about determination, about refusing to let the enemy dictate the terms of the conflict. The day came when the Thanar returned, their ships darkening the sky like a storm cloud. The battle was fierce, unlike anything we had ever faced. The Thanar were relentless, their warships battering our defenses, but we held fast. We fought not just for survival anymore. We fought for the memory of those who had fallen, for the future of the Creel, and for the humans who had made us believe that victory was still possible. In the heart of that battle, I saw something I had never seen before. A unity between our two peoples. A bond forged in the fires of war. The humans fought as though they were one of us, not an ally, but a part of us. And in that moment, we were no longer two species, Creel and human. We were a single force, standing side by side against the darkness. When the battle ended, the Thanar had been driven back once again, their losses too great to recover from. It wasn't a final victory, not yet, but it was a turning point. The galaxy would remember the day when two seemingly insignificant species, once cast aside by the more powerful empires, had stood together and defied an invincible enemy. We had cried for help, and the humans had answered. They had stood with us when no one else would, and together, we had proven that even the smallest spark of hope could ignite a fire that would burn through the darkest night. It was a victory born not of firepower, but of unity. And that was a lesson that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come.